meetings, and we've been chatting with people around the world, and it's been really a great time just to reconnect. So I'm really excited this morning. I have two very special people in my life and in a lot of people's lives, I think, who are going to share with us today. So Denise is in Taupo, New Zealand, and Amanda is a couple of suburbs from me here in Sydney, Australia. And I put out a kind of a topic that we were going to talk about today, and when I read it back to myself, I thought, wow, in an hour we're going to cover a lot of things. I'm actually not sure we're going to cover everything, but we're going to have a good try. And I think for the time that we're in, the season that we're in, it's a really good topic to be just thinking about and listening to. Well, the heart of the Father, really, on what it is to live and die and live again. It feels like a lot of things are out of our control at the moment. It feels like we're having to give up a lot of things, and that's causing a lot of angst and anxiety for people. There are obviously many of us who are suffering from lots of different things, from financial stress and just not being able to see loved ones, to also, some people have lost loved ones. So it's been quite a time that we haven't kind of known what to do in some ways. We haven't been this way before, I guess that's what we would say. And but I've just been looking back over the last 12 months, particularly we were together in the US last year, and Denise was talking about death and resurrection then, and she was talking about the whole premise of what that looks like in our Christian walk. And so I really enjoyed that at the time, and it really challenged me. And then we came into this pandemic season in March, and I just thought, wow. And I started to go back and listen to some of those things. And so I just want to start this morning. I'm really hoping this will be very much more a discussion than a question answer, because I feel like both Denise and Amanda have things to add to the subject, and and knowing them, they'll bounce off each other. So they know each other pretty well, so it works, So I guess, yeah, I think when we were first talking about this whole subject, Denise, you were saying that really the Christian life is a life of death and resurrection. That's what it's about, and that's where we come into the fullness of it. And so I'm just wondering if you could explain that a little bit more, unpack that a little bit more.
Yeah. First of all, I'd just like to say hi to everybody.
Of course.
And I guess what you're going to see today is one of Amanda and my usual chats.
Just shorter.
Just shorter, yeah, the short version of it. And we have these kind of chats a lot. So today you're all experiencing it, but I guess my disclaimer is, one of the reasons that I hesitate doing things online is because it's there forever.
Yeah.
And so, if you go to a conference or something, you can just walk out, you walk out and brush it off if you didn't like it. My disclaimer is, if this is just a chat between us, and so we're not trying to be theologically correct. We just want to speak from our hearts and from what we see at the moment, and everything, as we know, on our intimacy with God, everything changes and grows deeper. Some things grow deeper and some things drop off altogether. But we can't ever get away from this principle that we see right through Scripture. Even, as I was thinking, it's not even Scripture, it's written into the universe. This whole notion of death and resurrection. And there's a little bit in the middle there, which we haven't mentioned yet, which we'll mention a little bit later probably. But death and resurrection are just so foundational to the lives that we live. It's the life of the planet. Systems come and go, everything comes and goes, and nothing goes without first struggling. And, the struggle is, before the death. But there is no, what comes back to what you originally said there, Lynn, is one of the things that I guess I just coined into a phrase because it's so real, is that the only Christian life, true Christian life, is resurrection life. It's the part that, you know, we've gone through our hard times, our many, many deaths, and stuck with it, you know, and then come into a place of resurrection where a lot of our old, sometimes even our old beliefs or the old ways that we believe things should be have fallen away. And then we come in, and somehow we just feel much freer, you know, through that death and come through to resurrection. And yeah, just much. It's just an important. It's just how it.
I think that for many of us, I know for me, when I think back to times that I've struggled, it's not a thing that you do. It's generally a thing we fight. It's not something we say, bring it on. You know,
No, and I actually think too that we've been taught to fight it.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? For a lot of us growing up in particularly evangelical Christianity, I think the death has been something we've been taught to resist. You know, to stand in our victory and to, you know, to fight and to push through, and you know, as if the death is a failure, is where we've let the enemy, you know, take ground in our lives. And I think that's been just phenomenally damaging and unhelpful, and stunted so many of us in our growth for so many years because we resisted the death. But you know, I was thinking about it. Well, I think about it all the time. But I was thinking yesterday just how, you know, from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, you know, the death is on the bad side, and the chaos, because really it's death, and then there's a time of chaos. And so we put that in the tree of knowledge, we put those parts in the bad side, and we put the resurrection in the good side. But you know, in the tree of life, you know, in the breadth of the heart of the Father, or in the arms, in the sense of the heart of the Father, he holds the death and he holds the chaos, and he's in the resurrection. But he's in those other things too, because really what's dying, in a sense, is our independent self. And that's the block, you know, to really living in the love and the freedom of God. And I think that, but, you know, in that, we also don't resent that independent self. We've needed that self at times. As we've grown, and, you know, particularly as children, we've needed to develop those parts of ourselves for self-preservation, you know, to fit in, to belong. But they no longer serve us as we begin to mature. And so that's where we really, you know, we, in a sense, abandon ourselves as we grow in faith and are able to trust God to let those independent parts of ourselves go, the shadow self, in a sense. And then we allow our true self, who we really are in Christ, who he's really created to be, to, you know, we make space for that really to appear. And that really unblocks the flow of life. You know, we become part of that life that, you know, Mum and Dad often talk about, that generative spiraling love of God that we, you know, we are included in, that it impedes the, you know, that independence impedes the flow. But as we come into the love of God, and we can trust, you know, that God is going to, when we let that independent self go, that God is going to, you know, it's like new skin after a sunburn. It's like it needs to come off, that you know, a new layer is revealed, and that, you know, so we are in that kind of union of that flow of life. But I think that, you know, we were taught to resent that independent self. But, you know, I think that in kindness to ourselves, and just to the process of being human, which we're here to be human. We are here to be human, you know, and I think we've also been taught that, you know, we're here to be something other than that. But this is the human experience that we're having, and it's appropriate that we're having it. And so, you know, I think that we need to be kind to ourselves. We've needed that self. But as we grow in our walk with the Father, we no longer need, you know, we can, as we grow in that trust and that dependence, that interdependence, we can let those parts go, that we come more fully into the flow, and that those things block. But it's a process, you know, and it can be an ugly and uncomfortable process at times. But God is not, you know, he's holding that whole thing. He holds the chaos. You know, we shouldn't be afraid of that. And I think that, again, we were taught to be afraid of that. That was something we were to resist, as opposed to fully surrender to.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. You know, and the thing is that, you know, when we're coming to that, we're in that place of chaos when we're losing control.
Yeah.
You know, and part of death is losing control.
Yeah.
And that's just, you know, and we have to trade control for trust.
Yeah.
And so the issue is, you know, when you're losing control, you fight for it.
Yeah.
You know, as you're saying, like it's our independence. You know, we're finding out that actually we're not as independent, we're not as strong as we thought we were. We're not 10 foot tall and bulletproof like we used to be. You know, we thought that was the illusion anyway.
Yeah, that's right.
And so, you know, we're not that anymore. And it just is a reality that no one wants to die. It just does not seem, you know, it just doesn't seem like it's like it should happen. It feels so unnatural. To come to a place where we're fighting, you know, we're fighting to stay alive. And so it's just, you know, as you say, part of, you know, maturing is just learning that process of learning to let go and to, and just finding that greater place of trust. It's huge.
I mean, the holding on is an illusion, right? Like, what is it that we're holding on to? The control is actually an illusion. It's not a real thing. I think we've all sort of, you know, particularly as you get a little bit older, you know, you've certainly had enough experience to know that the control is not a real thing. It's you know, so it's really just being able to trust.
Yeah.
In a sense where I know this sounds may sound a bit challenging to some, but for me, I feel like we've actually in a time of rest right now. Like there's a sense where we've been gifted time to be still. Yeah, and a lot of us, like you say, even fighting that, like we're struggling with this sense of, but in rest, we really, you know, I think we really come into that place of meeting God and really hearing his heart, because there's space now, space for that. And
yeah, I think one of the things, you know, depending where you are in our walk, but one of the worst words in the New Testament is the word suffering. And, you know, we hate that because it doesn't feel right. And, you know, because we line suffering up. Well, you know, if God was a God of love, then he wouldn't let this happen. And if God really loved me, he wouldn't have done this. Or, you know, and I don't believe he did do it, but whatever happened, he said, I'll be with you in it. But, you know, the whole thing is, why am I feeling like this? This cannot be God, because, you know, God is, you know, good, fluffy, loving, you know, all those things. But if he really loved me, I wouldn't be experiencing this. But suffering is such a key, like it is the key. And I remember years ago just realizing, you know, that if Jesus gained perfection and that place in the Father's heart through the things he suffered, you know, then it's not going to be any different for us. You know, we're going to come in to Christ-likeness the same way that he did. And it's through that place of suffering. It's something that I think a lot of us, including me, I don't like suffering at all, but it does have a fruit, and the fruit is life. You know, Jesus, you know, the ultimate suffering, you know, that he went through and tasted death. The Bible says he tasted death for everyone. No one will ever taste death on the scale that Jesus did. And, you know, so he's tasted death for us. and the suffering he suffered. I mean, we will never ever touch anything like that. However, in our own, as you said, Amanda, we are human. We're having a human experience right now, and we don't want suffering to be part of it. But if we want to know God and to be found in Him, as Paul says, I love that. And is it Philippians 3 where he says, that I may know Him and be found in Him. If we want to be found in Him, then the way in is through suffering. And Paul talked about it a lot, didn't he? He talked about, how, all the things that he went through. And he ended up by saying in the passage in 2 Corinthians 4, he said, so then death works in us, so that life works in you. And I think as he says, ministers of the new covenant, which is what we all are. If anyone who is in Christ is a minister of the new covenant. And so as ministers of the new covenant, we produce life through the death that we have allowed ourselves to go through. And I mean, another great realization that I had a few years ago was realizing that, that with the seed of life, that is Christ in us, that seed falls into the ground. It falls into the ground, the soil of our life. But see, the soil of our life, like any good soil, is made up of death. The good soil, if you've got good soil around your home, it's because many leaves have fallen into it, many little animals, worms, whatever, have died in that and have made it a rich soil. And it's the same with our life. It's the same with our heart, that, the death and the dying that we have allowed, God to do in us, as Paul says, produces life in you, because it means that the seed has a much better ground to grow in.
Yeah. I mean, thinking like, as a parent, there are so many times that we make calls for our kids that we know they're not going to understand because it's going to feel like suffering to them. But we know that it's for their good, and so we put up with, and we, even in that as a parent, how often do we feel the pain of their disappointment or whatever it is that, the call that we're making. We feel that with them. In fact, I often wonder, I feel like as a parent, the suffering is actually more painful. We all want to suffer for our children as Jesus did. You want to suffer for them. You don't want them to have to go through it, but there's no other way but that they feel those things themselves. But those are the things that ultimately produce good fruit. And so I think, for me, it really helps me to understand that, because I see in my children who they really are, as best as and our human experience able to see that. I see that, and I see that what's happening with them is a block to them coming into a greater fullness of life and, a greater freedom in who they are. So, we make those calls. It's no different to the Father, It's like he knows who we are. In fact, he loves us enough to discipline us, in the sense that to put us in a position where something's going to give, because he sees the greater good. He sees the life. He wants to break the impediments to the flow of his life in us, to seeing fullness of life in us, and that we would be the sons, that the earth is crying out for, that we would be part of. I woke up the other morning with the scripture in my head, heal the sick, lay hands on, what is it? Heal the sick, bind up the brokenhearted, and set the captives free. I thought, that's just, I think for anyone who's a believer, that our heart is to be, we want to see that, and the only way to be givers of that life is to get out of the way ourselves, within ourselves. It's part of the thing. So the Father sees us as, you know, as givers of life, as he is a giver of life, you know, that flow that we enter into. And it's like, but we, you know, it means that as Jesus suffered for that life to flow, we also, in a degree, take on a suffering for that life to flow. But I think as you get older and more mature in your faith, and you have suffered over time, the suffering changes, because you know it feels purposeful.
Yeah.
I think it's not the same kind of suffering as when you're younger.
Yeah.
I sort of that more mature, I mean, as we're maturing, I think our understanding of purpose and our desire to really want to live in the freedom and the fullness. And I think we then begin to, as we feel the suffering, there's definitely something that says that this is for my good. And like Mum's often said in our conversations, die well, like die fully. We want to complete this death, like just lie down, let the rock, you know, because you want everything. I want all the life out of this situation. Like, yes, this is painful, but I don't want this time to pass without every purpose in it being fulfilled. You know, there's that, I think as you mature, there's that sense, that desire to, you know, there's a bigger purpose. You know, you've grown in confidence and in faith of the Father's love for you. You know that he is good no matter what's happening in your life. So you know that this current suffering is going to produce good fruit. And so you want to submit to every aspect of what is happening, because he loves you enough to want to see you free.
Yeah.
You know? So I think that's something that comes as you know, as you have learned to submit to suffering and to see it as a good thing.
Yeah. The you know, I often say, don't waste a good death. You know, like it's like, if it's gonna happen, if it's happening, just, you know, do it well.
Yeah, that's
you
right.
know, and you know, I'm taking my earplugs out because they're not working anyway. But you know, if you're in that place, and you know, as you say, when we are in that place, I think we don't fight as much, you know, as we used to. It's like, well, this isn't the kind of death I would have chosen, but you know, so be it. Let's go with it, because it is going to work in, you know, a great well of produce.
Yeah.
And so what it's about, isn't it? Just entering in, as you know, Paul says, we're entering into his sufferings.
Yeah.
And there's no life without it. You know, there cannot be any life without, you know, that death. Yeah. And you know, and I think there's probably other metaphors for it too. You know, some people would say that probably after a death. I think I could just talk about that for a minute. You know, so because we all know how we fight for the death, but you know, after the death, you know, some people may say they feel like they're in a wilderness. You know, some people would call it the dark night of the soul. Some people just experience just a deep peace, just thinking, oh, I don't know what it was, but the fight is over. You know, and these are the hours before resurrection, or sometimes the days, sometimes the week before resurrection. But you're in that place where it's kind of like you've been in a big fight, and you kind of wake up thinking, what happened? You know, it's like, cool. I mean, I'm relieved of something, but what just happened? And so we go through those seasons too, where there's just emptiness. Yeah. You know, because nothing's come into that place yet. And so we do feel like just a stage of just feeling empty. And you know, but all that is a part of I think it's a 3-stage project.
Yeah.
You know? It's I was reading something, just remembering something of Julia of Norwich, who said, what did she say? She said, first there is the fall, then there is the recovery from the fall, and both is the mercy of God. And I remember putting that on my wall one time, probably about 4 or 5 years ago, and there was not one tick or comment.
You mean on Facebook?
And usually if I post something, there's usually at least a tick. At least somebody's going to tick it or like it. But I put that first there is the fall, then there is the recovery of the fall, and both are the mercy of God. Yeah. And you think how true that is. You know, just talking about death and resurrection.
Yeah.
Both are the mercy of God.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering whether you just bring it sort of to ground it a little bit, whether you can perhaps give some examples from your own lives, just of perhaps a journey in that.
I don't know how good Amanda and I are good at grounding things.
I've challenged you already.
Can you ground it, Lynn?
Yeah, you might be better at that then.
I don't know. I'm just thinking, we've all been through lots of things. I guess for us, or for me, I think one of those times was, and often it's about an identity crisis. I feel like that comes into it in a big way. And I think for me, perhaps that was when we stopped pastoring churches and sort of stepped right out of that.
Yeah.
And I nearly felt like the Israelites when they left Egypt. And, I had all these amazing sort of opportunities, and then had all these memories, like the dividing of the sea, and then got into the desert and thought, let's go back, like it's all too hard.
That's right.
And that's what I know, and that's who I am. I know how to do that. But now I'm in this place where actually I don't know what to do, and it was difficult for a while. I mean, Amanda, you'll remember when we first started to gather again, and we didn't, there was a sense where community started really first. And then out of that, we suddenly realized, I think our identity came back, that our identity wasn't in what we do or where we're going or how we do it, but our identity really is in the Father, and that we are sons and daughters. Doesn't matter what we do, where we live, how we live, it's really his love that keeps us grounded. And so I think there's a lot of death that goes on just in that. We can talk about it out there in the world, and I think at the moment it's really hard because we don't know what it's going to look like in time. But we do know we're on there is definitely a spiritual journey going on for many of us, and it's good to talk about, I feel, that shift in that spiritual journey. Denise, you've been talking a little bit about when Jesus talked about the time to come, and I think we're really in that phase, but without that groundedness of our identity in the Father and our understanding of the opportunity, the life that's out there for us to have, we're very reluctant to keep going. We want to go back. I think people like that even now want to go back to what we know because we don't know. We're scared of what we don't know. But it's a deeper thing than what's happening out there. That's what I feel.
I mean, for those that don't know Lynn and I well, we years ago we sort of stepped out of the sort of, is it okay to say the institution of church? Is that and that was a massive death. I'd been in that my whole life, and I had believed, I'd been earnest. So, and then when, it was one of those things that it was great and it worked really well until it didn't. And then, so even being in it and then saying, why am I still feeling like something really major is missing in my life or my thinking, or we had in the church we were in, we had some significant moves of God, and we'd seen some we just had some amazing times and experiences, and so then why am I feeling all of this but still feeling like something's not right? And I couldn't put my finger on what it was. And I mean, that was one of the things where the death was incredibly, it was probably one of the most painful sufferings, because my whole life had been that. I thought God and church were the same thing. And so how could God be good and yet, things in my experience it was just so paradoxical, so conflicting. So it was a big death, because that was, God and church were synonymous with one another, and something was missing. So how can something be missing when God, and so anyway, like Lynn, I think like what you were saying, the death was so significant. The chaos that came after it was incredibly painful. I mean, Mum and Dad would know, attest to the fact that I would just ring them so beside myself, saying, I think I'm losing my mind.
Yeah.
I think I'm actually going crazy.
That's right.
And I was just so undone, because everything I thought I knew, suddenly I didn't know. So the death was over years. Like, when we started meeting, Lynn, it's not an exaggeration to say that for years we literally would get together, go home just as miserable as we got together, because we wouldn't try and do a service. We just wanted to be human. We wanted to, we wanted to just unknow everything that we knew and start again, in a sense. And so we would just sit there, and sometimes, some nights, no one would speak. Someone would cry, we'd be a bit weepy and a bit sad, and the frustration was we all knew how to do a service and make everyone feel really nice. We could, at any point, we'd all done this. We knew what to say, what to do. We could make everyone feel good. So we'd all go home going, yes, that felt, but we didn't want to do that. We wanted to just draw on something that we knew was there, but we didn't know what it was. So really the undoing was years of pain. We were angry, we were sad, not angry at what we had left. We were angry that just with that it was the frustration of knowing there was something more, but not knowing how to get there. So that death was really huge. I mean, it was years. It was a long, long suffering. But coming out the other side, past the chaos and disorder and the unknowing and the unlearning. I mean, really, the process of the last 12, 13 years for me has definitely been the unlearning, and trying to just really live, really trusting my heart. It's another thing I think that sometimes in church, not sometimes, I think for most of us in our church experience, we're taught not to trust our heart. We're taught to trust whatever's coming from the front. And so if I'm feeling something different, or I'm listening to something and it's making me feel very uncomfortable, it can't be this, I must be wrong. They must be right. So we're taught to not trust that voice within us. Yeah. And so it was really a process of learning to trust that I do hear God. He is speaking to me all the time, and I can trust that voice. And so, but, to cut a very long story shorter, the other side of that has been the joy of not needing to know. The joy of uncertainty, the joy of I just can trust, and I don't need to have the answers. I don't need to know. I don't need to understand everything. And living in the freedom of that. I mean, it's a phenomenal freedom. And the illustration I think just describes it best for me. It's like coming out of the Matrix. You don't know you're in it, but once you come out, there's no going. You couldn't go back if you tried. You wouldn't want to go back. But there's so much freedom. There's so much, like, God is in absolutely everything, everywhere, all the time. That's been just to be able to live. I feel like for me I was living in one dimension, and there's as many dimensions. Like, there's just no limit to the air, to the space, to the to the freedom. And that has been, that death was the most painful and the longest. But I am so grateful for that. I am incredibly grateful that we experienced that. And of course, I feel especially blessed because I was doing it alongside, very good friends, people who I really loved and trusted. And although we were all falling apart together, and it just was not pretty for some years, as authentic community grew through that, I just feel like it was a very, very precious death.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing. I think that I think this is another kind of principle. It's to the depth of death we go is the depth of death. I mean, of life, freedom that we experience. And I think it's the same, with suffering. I think as we allow ourselves to, I mean, you never wallow in suffering. Nobody, maybe some people do, but a healthy person does not wallow in suffering.
Yeah.
But to the depth that we allow God to do that work is to the depth of his compassion that can also operate through our life. I think that's one of the things I think, when we don't allow, God to work his fullness into us, is that we so miss out on the freedom and the life.
Yeah.
And so does everyone around us, because that's the depth. Like, as you say, I mean, I so remember clearly that time, and you in those years were a person I didn't know. I'd never known you to be so unsure about yourself.
Yeah.
And so, and that was quite distressing, from a long, as you know, that as a parent, to see that in your child that you know so well. And but then, but that was the extent, that God in his love took you.
Yeah, that's
to
right.
bring you into the amount of life that you have now. And I think, the same, when you said about grounding it in experience, I've often hark back to probably, as Amanda's talked about her deepest death experience. I think for me it was, the end of the 80s, early 90s. And we had, when we became Christians in 1972, we read fantastic books. It was a wonderful time of Christianity, for that season. It was all, following hard after God, that was one of the things, and we all wanted to follow hard after God. And that wasn't hard because his presence was so there to draw us into that. But, soon it became, we took on the job ourselves. Instead of following the Holy Spirit, we thought we knew what to do, and we knew how much to read every day, how much to pray every day, how much to serve every day, how, all the things we need to do every day. So we kind of left Holy Spirit behind. And I think we were more vigorous than he was in our life. And we required a lot more of ourselves than he did. And so eventually, after, several experiences and, trying to be all things to all men all the time, we hit the wall and burnt out to the extent that everything that we had wanted to attain to was just lost overnight, basically. Because at the end of, we'd done all these things for God and, with God we thought and hoped, but then one day, some of you it's probably on CDs all around, people have heard this, but, I was just coming down with James and I were just going out to church. Amanda and Chris, our oldest son, were overseas at the time in England. I was just coming, we're going out, we're pastoring this church. And as I was going out just before I went out the door, I just started to cry. And I cried like I don't know if I've ever cried before. It just came from, I don't know, it seemed like it was even underneath me, up through my feet and up my body. And my eyes weren't big enough to kind of contain, to let this stuff out. Anyway, it was that kind of crying. So it was ugly cry, right? It wasn't a movie star cry. Anyway, and James just was startled. He was looking at me like, what on earth's happened? He said, we just had bad news, or somebody died, or, like what? Because we've got our kids overseas. So he's just thinking, maybe we've just had bad news. Anyway, it took me a little while, but I'm in my mind is really clear. Like, well, it's blank, really. But I'm trying to think. I'm disassociated, put it that way. Something's going on in my heart, my mind knows nothing about. But I'm thinking I have to say something because he thinks, something really terrible has happened. So I just, with my mouth, I didn't even know what I was going to say, but out of my mouth came, I can't do this anymore. I just can't do this anymore. I can't go and face those people one more time. Like, these people think I'm a good person. They all think that I'm, the savior of their lives. I've been doing a lot of counseling, a lot of pastoral stuff, a lot of, so we had a lot of people living with us who were in great distress. And I was the caretaker. I was there to be Jesus to them all. And so anyway, I figured out after a while that I wasn't Jesus and I couldn't do it. But that was the beginning, really, of 2 years of absolute nothing. Absolute nothing. It was, yeah, I mean, that was such a death that I didn't even know whether I would survive physically, let alone spiritually, whether I'd ever have any faith. And that time I didn't know if God really existed. I can remember saying to James once, I think we were brainwashed. You know, I think we came into that church where there was so much going on, and, you know, that we just kind of got caught up in some kind of brainwashing. So, you know, I went to that place. Fortunately, James didn't. He never lost. He didn't lose it to the extent I did. But I just, you know, that took me into all this time of really having to find God again, or letting him find me. But this time completely different, you know, completely different. And I look back now, you know, read the title of a book once, and I think it's a great little phrase called, maybe it'll come back. It always happens. It was going to be a great line. Severe mercy. There you go.
There you go. Yeah.
A severe mercy. That's what it was. Those years of being out of touch, you know, with God. Just, you know, you go back into your old habits. There's nothing else. And yet I couldn't go back into what we'd call the world. You know, it wasn't like I couldn't go anywhere. I was stuck because I knew there was nothing back there because I'd been there. And now there's nothing in God because I've been there too. And so kind of in this stage where you don't know anymore. And fortunately, God knows where to find you. And it turns out, Mans, as you said earlier, it's all, he's just holding it all while we're going through our ups and downs. And, you know, he's just holding it all, patiently waiting for us to calm down enough. And I'll tell you.
Yeah. It's the thing. I mean, we feel like we're in free fall, right? Whereas actually we're not.
Yeah.
We're being perfectly held.
That's right.
It's going to be okay. Yeah. But it feels like free fall. You feel completely naked, absolutely vulnerable. But it's you know, it ends up being beautiful, a beautiful thing.
Yeah. You know, and then you just mentioned before about, you know, the age, you know, been talking a little about recently. It's just been, you know, just over probably the last 18 months. And I've just felt the Lord really kind of emphasized to me in my daily, you know, ups and downs and things that we're going through now, also in the pandemic, that we are, you know, it just seems when Jesus talked about the two ages, you know, both, he says that both in this age and in the age to come. And Paul often refers to this age and the age to come. And in one place he talks about, I think it's in 1 Corinthians, he talks about, you know, arguing and fights, and, you know, and if you're still arguing and fighting and having judgments against, you're mere humans. You know, you're acting like mere humans. So I think what God at this moment, to me anyway, is emphasizing that we're in this age, but we're also transversing, or we're coming into the age to come. And that age to come, which is the age that we were all born for, that age to come is, I believe, is getting more, we're feeling it more, you know. And it's sometimes, I had a very weird experience the other day, and it's too weird to tell you on this.
I'll chat to you later.
But what the whole feeling of it. Okay, so sometimes God gives us a picture, but it's to describe something. It's not actually the picture. It's what Paul Young says. It's true, but it's not real.
Yeah.
You know, yeah, that's a great phrase, a great way to, you know, to describe sometimes the way God speaks to us. He'll give us a picture that's true, but it's not real. And in this picture that was true but not real, or real but not true, I can't remember which way he says it now. But I just felt like that the age to come, and it's kind of what we call heaven, I guess, because we're all thinking we're going to die and go to heaven. However, heaven is coming to earth.
Yeah.
We're not going to die and go to heaven, but heaven is coming to earth. That's why our Father who art in heaven, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And talks about, that Jesus is coming from heaven. We await a savior from there. He's coming to earth. Heaven is heaven. And so I just had this feeling that day, as I've been thinking about, we're coming from the age that is passing away. And I believe that's a lot of what we're seeing graphically. And we're entering into the age that's to come. And I just kind of almost can feel like they're both here. They're like, they're like an inch away from one another. One's fading into the other. Where if this is heaven, it's going to passing through. And, this is kind of how I feel it's working.
Yeah.
Does that make sense, Amanda?
Makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah. Awesome.
I think because, it's like, we all grew up believing, heaven was out there somewhere. But I think, the more we come into freedom, the more we realize heaven's here. Like we get to touch upon it a little bit, and, the great, I think, it's like God is so personal, intimate, yet he's so completely unknowable. It's like this, you get these glimpses, these touches of the bigness and the expanse of God, and more fully in your full experience. I think, suddenly even things like nature have become alive to me with the presence and the nature of God in a way that I never saw it my whole life. But I feel God very tangibly in everything now.
Yeah.
And I think that, that the more that we come into that freedom and that, experience of love, as Dad says, that changes us into everything that a Christian should be.
That's right.
The more that we are able, feel that, the God life and all of creation. And I think there's no, like you talking about the age that was and the age to come, there's no coincidence what's happening now. That we are being forced into rest, most of us being forced into a place of rest. It's very uncomfortable because we are, human doings, and we like to do stuff. And yet for most people, this has been a very confronting time and the not being able to do. But I think that there is no growth outside of rest.
Yeah.
There is no real understanding, no life outside of, and like, of course, we're not meant to just do nothing, but, because we all love to do stuff, actually, but we're being forced into a place of rest. And I think it's not, of course, God did not create these situations, but he also knew he wasn't caught like, oops, what's happening? He knew. And so I think that, even the way that we are beginning to become so aware of his love for creation, we grieve over what's happening in creation. Most of us, it's painful to see what's happening in the earth. We worry and we grieve over it. That, I believe, is very much the heart of God. He also grieves over what's happening because he has set in motion the restoration of all things. It said that on the cross was the restoration of all things. That's us, but it's all things. Because as you said, Mel, I firmly believe heaven is coming to earth. It's, and so, it's that something happened on the cross that was beginning the restoration of all things.
Exactly.
But we're in the chaos stage. We're in the disorder. So we're in the death. We're in a death stage. But after that comes a resurrection phase. Yeah. And so, we're headed there. So it's sort of resting in this discomfort of all that's going on in the world, knowing that God has not been caught unaware, and that he has so much, what does Paul Young say? He says he has so much respect for us. Like he has so much faith in us that we are part of the healing of the earth. And, you know, he allows, it's like, you know, in this time, as Mum and I think Lynn talked about this the other day, die well in this time, because how great would it be to be one of the sons of God being revealed, you know, part of the healing of the earth. I don't mind being seen as, you know, slightly off kilter, but I do bless my trees. I do bless my garden. I do bless, you know, the ocean when I'm walking beside it. Because I believe that, you know, I'm just little, but I'm happy. I am a flow of life. Like, you know, it's despite me. I'm not, you know, I just know that despite me, God is present, and God, you know, the life of God is flowing through me. And it seems a bit ridiculous, but you know, he's God, and he said he's going to do it, and he can do it without us, but he's going to do it with us, because, you know, he loves us and he wants to include us in the restoration of the earth. And so I just forgot why I was saying that, but I you know, we are in the new age to come. And or coming into that. And I had this experience in prayer the other week. And, you know, just, you know, for all those that practice contemplative prayer, you know that most of the time you're just trying to remember that you're there to pray, not what you're going to cook for dinner, or, you know, trying to listen to what the neighbours are fighting about. So anyway, I was just in one of those moments when suddenly I realised that the atmosphere changed. It was completely different. I was sitting in a completely different atmosphere. And it shocked me into being in the moment, because it felt so incredible. And it was so obvious that in that atmosphere, absolutely anything was a possibility. There was absolutely no limitation. I feel like I could have I wish, because my son has a, you know, chronic illness, and we're you know, he's my guinea pig. I tell him that, you know, we're going to watch, you know, he has to put up with me forever, blessing his body, because I'm like, we're determined to see this realm come here onto the earth, you know. And so he sort of rolls his eyes at me, you know, whenever I'm coming near him, and he can see I'm about to bless his body again. But in that present, I was like, this is it. Like, this is there. This is the other dimension. This is the one this is the heaven dimension. This is where everything is possible. There's no limitation. And this is where this is the air that we're actually breathing. You know, we just don't, I was like, how could I wanted to keep one foot in both atmospheres. And if I could somehow bring, you know, but I mean, I believe God allowed me to experience that, because that's our truth, and he wants us to live in that air. He wants us to experience that. And again, I don't think that that's something we do. It's just something that, despite us, he will do. He's doing. You know, it's. I think.
You know, I think that, you know, as you know, we've talked about this before, but you know, this is when I'm talking about the age and the age to come, that right now, you know, it just seems like, you know, I mentioned before that scripture where Paul says, you know, if there's arguing, fighting, all that kind of stuff, you know, you're still mere humans.
Yeah.
You know, and so a lot of us are still living in that realm. But there is, and this is what is, I think, is exciting, and why it's pertinent to talk about the two ages, is because we can begin to enter into the ages to come.
Yeah.
That's what Paul was all about. New Testament writers were all talking about, we're living, you know, we're seated with Christ in heavenly places. A lot of these things are just verses on a, you know, black verses on a white page. Actually, the reality of those is available for us to really go into, so that when the world's rocking and rolling, and, you know, pandemics come and go, and our loved ones, you know, are confronted with all kinds of things, there is still a place that we can enter into. Coming through, as you said, man, it's just really practicing. It's coming into that stages where we just spend time alone with God and just, I mean, you can't try to enter that place.
No, that's right.
And I often say, and I heard this once, I just love this. It's like you come into times of contemplation, prayer, contemplation, waiting on God. The olden days they used to call it waiting on God. Now contemplative prayer, or but so often you're there, you give your time, and centering prayer is another one. It's all just what the old, writers used to call waiting on God. Andrew Murray, some of the great people we all grew up with. But the thing is that in those wasted times, it's like, let me say it like this. How did I phrase it once? Having the experience of God is an accident. Like when you had that the other day, it was kind of like it was an accident. You didn't make it happen.
No.
But waiting on God makes you accident prone.
Yes, that's very good. Yeah, that's a very good little phrase. Makes you accident prone. I love, Thomas Merton, I think it was, someone who was talking to someone about contemplative prayer, and they said, I just can't do it. Like I just get too distracted. My mind is too distracted. I sit down to talk to God and I'm just distracted. And he said, how many times do you think you come back? And she said, I don't know, maybe 100 times. He said, isn't that wonderful? 100 times you remembered God.
Yeah.
And I just thought, that's the reality of it, right? Because for most of us, our minds just are busy and distracted. And you can see my friend Jude here on the screen, and we've talked about this before, that how many times do we do that? And that's the truth. It's, 100 times I remembered God and, felt nothing. But during the day, how many times did I see God?
Yeah.
How many times did God speak to or through me? And it's just despite us. I mean, we can just present, right? We don't have, we don't want to have power of our own. Do you know what I mean? We just faithfully present, not dutifully, but out of love, familiar, and family. We present just to be together. And what happens through that is God's business. And our joy. Yeah.
Yep, that's right.
I think it's really interesting.
Our time's up.
Yeah, our time is coming to an end. I feel like I could sit here all day, to be honest. It's been really just great listening to you to chat, which I'm sure everyone else has enjoyed it as well. And so thank you for your time, guys, and thank you.
Can I just correct something? Because sometimes when I tell this story, the story I told earlier, I feel like people are hearing an anti-church sentiment. Please don't take it. Please don't. I was talking about my own experience and my journey. That's certainly not a judgment on church, or, I don't want anyone to think that is my heart in any way. I was, just as it pertained to my own personal experience. I just wanted to caveat.
Yeah, that's great, Amanda, because I mean we do appreciate what happens out there, and everyone's journey is very different, and our journey is very, very different, and all for different seasons and different reasons,
Yeah,
so,
right.
that was great to have that at the end. But yeah, so thanks everyone for joining us. We will be back again on the second Saturday of next month. I don't know who will be speaking, but we'll look forward to seeing you then. But thanks heaps, guys. It's really good.
Thank you. It's good.
See you,
everybody.